Hello. Since 1977, White Dwarf magazine has become the premier place for coverage of Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40,000, and Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and many other Games Workshop games. There have now been over 500 issues of the magazine, and there are countless articles, battle reports, scenarios, story, and all sorts of other stuff that has brought incredible depth and richness to the worlds of Warhammer. There have also been several international versions of the magazine that have explored the hobby in their own unique ways. My guest today was integral to the creation of one of them. Dave Taylor was the founding editor of White Dwarf Australia, and he is famous for his amazing kitbashed armies. We talk about Dave's career with Games Workshop, the differences in culture in the UK, Australia, and US arms of the company, the business and economics of making White Dwarf, and how those international versions of the magazine came to be. And we also get into Dave's more recent efforts, Dave Taylor Miniatures, where he has been publishing a series of books about the greatest painters in the world. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with former White Dwarf Australia editor, Dave Taylor. Dave, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to be talking about your amazing career and getting into lots of really interesting stuff, but I thought it would be cool to start with just where you first got into miniatures. Where did the journey begin for you?
Cool. Yeah. I think with a lot of people, it was a lot of people my age, early 80s D&D. Started playing with my next door neighbor and a couple of friends. Played all throughout high school, and we bought miniatures at different times. Sometimes we bought them unpainted and painted them up with like Humbrol and Testors paints and that kind of thing. But it was my first year at university. I was walking down the street with a friend, and we popped into this hobby store, and they had all of these miniatures, and they had boxes of them on the shelves, and they had display cases full of unpainted miniatures. There were blister packs on the wall, that kind of thing as well. And I was like, these are all really cool. There's a lot. There's a lot of them. I don't really know what's going on here, but I know that I like them. And then I walked, we continued on. We walked down the street. We went into another game store, like a board game store, and they had a lot of chess sets with different types of side, so it wasn't just sort of a standard nicely carved black and white side. And I was like, hang on a second, maybe if I bought some of those other models I could paint them up and create a chess set of my own, like a very unique chess set. That would be fun. So that's what I did. Over the next couple of months I bought miniatures and painted them up, had like the old avatar as like the king on the white side.
Right.
I had Space Crusade Gretchen with the guys with sort of
Sure,
those with the shotguns as pawns for the black side. I think I had Blood Bowl dwarves as pawns for the white side. It's like the plastic Blood Bowl dwarves, because at this store they broke everything, as well as having the boxes. They also broke stuff down and they sold pieces individually,
right?
Which was, they weren't supposed to be doing that, but they did. But it meant that I could pick and choose a pretty crazy array of models. And once I'd finished that, I was like, I really enjoyed that. Maybe I'll do another one. And I saw this box on the shelf. Oh, this has got 30 models in it. I could take these and I can make some conversions and that kind of thing. And then I just need to get like a king for either side. And I've got 32 chess pieces. So I bought them up, bought that box of RTBO ones, of course. That's what it was. And painted them up a red and a blue side. And the next time I came back into the store, the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, how are your Space Marines going?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm almost finished." He goes, "Oh, that's great. I think you must have almost enough to start an army." And I was like, "Army? What do you mean army? How does this, what's the," he goes, "Well, these are for a game. It's called Rogue Trader. Here's the book." And I was like, let me see that book. And it all sort of went downhill, uphill from there.
Amazing.
Yeah. So that was where I got started. It was playing Rogue Trader. So this was 91, 91, 92, playing Rogue Trader, collecting the Skeleton Army box set to play Warhammer, playing Blood Bowl second edition, Epic, Space Marine, all that, everything around there
Yeah, just a
was,
bit of everything. That's
yeah,
fascinating then. So your like first Citadel project wasn't even anything to do with Warhammer or 40K. Making a chess set, that's a really cool idea.
yeah. It was just that it was Citadel miniatures that were
Yeah.
part of it. So yeah, and then after a little bit, that the staff member at the store asked me about the chess set, and I ended up going on display in the store for about like 6 months, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But
That's
somebody who
really
was like
cool.
18, 19 at the time was like, oh yeah, this is exciting. This is fun.
So were you
So,
were you just like naturally gifted when it came to the painting, or is that something that you developed over time?
oh, here's a funny story with that. I so when I painted my first that first Gretchen for that chess set, I was really happy with it. And as I said, I was at university at the time. I was doing graphic design. I took it along to one of my lecturers that I liked and appreciated his approach. And I showed it to him and said, "Oh, check out what I did over the weekend." And he looked at it and he goes, "You know, Dave, I thought you could have done better." And I was like, "I'll show you." I'm pretty sure, like looking back on it now, I'm pretty sure that he knew exactly what he was saying,
Right.
or what the response would be. So from then, yeah, it's just I worked at it and tried to improve my painting. I would say that for a while in my local painting group, not painting group, my local gaming club, sort of that I was playing with in my hometown, that I was probably the best painter there. So I wasn't able to learn a lot from them.
Right.
But as soon as there was Games Workshop store opened up in my hometown in 93, I think 93, 94, 1994. And I walked past and I looked in the window and there were all these beautifully painted miniatures. And I went in and spoke to the manager and I said, "Who painted those Empire handgunners in the window?" There were like four of them, just four of them, standing together. And he goes, "Oh, I painted those." And I said, "Oh, fantastic. How long did it take you to paint them?" And he goes, "I painted them last night." And I went, "What, all four?" He was like, "Yeah." I said, I basically dropped to my knees and said, "Teach me." So it was fantastic to have some great painters then in the store that I could go to and ask questions about and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah.
it
So
was
I mean,
very exciting.
when did it then become more than just a hobby? So when did the sort of transition happen that you stepped into working in that world?
Um, Basically, there was a point. It's, I had a job that I went to. I worked at a restaurant after my day at university. I'd go and work at the restaurant in the evening. And there was one night before the dinner rush. A bunch of us were sitting around, and one guy sort of laid out his 5-year plan, who he wanted to work for when he graduated, where he wanted to live, and all this sort of thing. And I was like, wow, that sounds really organized. That's pretty cool. Maybe I should get a 5-year plan. And so my 5-year plan was simply work for Games Workshop. In 5 years' time, I want to be working for Games Workshop. So probably a few months into the store being open, the that manager who had opened the store had moved on. There's another guy who became the manager, and he said, "Dave, you hear a lot anyway. You hear on Saturdays anyway. How would you like to? How would you like a part-time job?" And I said, "Well, that's cool. What do I need to do?" And he's like, "Pretty much the same thing you're doing, like teaching people how to paint and running people through demo games and that kind of thing." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds good. What's the pay like?" And he goes, "We could pay you in blister packs." So I think for my first like 3 or 4 shifts, I was paid in blister packs, and I got like a Wood Elf Blood Bowl team out of it, and some other bits and pieces. But after a little bit, like HR went, well, actually, we should be paying him. So we're legally required to. So switched over to pay. But that was probably middle of '94.
Right.
And at the end of that year, I finished my university degree, finished graphic design, and it was basically the last day. We had a party, and our lecturers had arranged for a whole bunch of people from the advertising industry to come along to it, so we could do some networking and that kind of thing. And that was on a Monday. That was a Monday evening for that party. On the Saturday before, the area manager, a great guy by the name of Martin Perkins, had said, "Hey, Dave, you know we've just fired TQ." It was one of the staff members in the store. They're just like, "Oh," and I was like, "Yep." And he goes, "Can you start on Monday?" It's full time. And I was like, "Not Monday. I've got this big party that I'm going to, like, for the end of my schooling." And he was like, "How about Tuesday?" I was like, "Okay." So they gave me a key, and Tuesday morning I sort of rocked up to the store, and that was the start of my full-time with Games Workshop.
So is the 5-year plan achieved in just a matter of months?
Yeah, but probably, yeah, but I think it was probably a year at that point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But, and then after that, it was like, oh, cool, I'm already there. We're done.
So how long did you stay within the sort of in the retail arm?
So I worked in retail for probably, when was that? So started the end of '94, all of '95 and '96, I was in retail. I became a store manager fairly quickly. The Sydney City store in central Sydney. Then became an area supervisor. And then actually moved on to being a store opening manager. So I opened the Games Workshop store in Adelaide, Games Workshop store in Melbourne. It was basically where you'd go live there for 3 months, move on to the next stores. You'd recruit the staff, you'd train them up, you'd make sure all the miniatures were painted for the cabinet and armies for game night and that kind of thing. So, yeah, probably around the end of '96 was when or beginning of '97 is when I left retail.
That's really interesting, but just about the sort of the store opening management, like just getting things lined up and start. I mean, the guy who'd painted those Pistoliers presumably was doing exactly that.
Yeah.
And he then moved on to somewhere else and set that up, right?
Yeah. He opened a couple of stores. He had opened I think they'd hired him, and he opened the stores in some of the stores in Sydney, and then Newcastle was the next one that they opened, and then he moved back to Sydney. They opened another couple in Sydney, and then he was just managing one of the stores.
Sure.
And then I think he sort of had enough of moving around. And
yeah, because it must be quite because obviously there's a lot of different elements to that. I imagine opening a new store, recruiting a load of new people, new areas, and all that sort of stuff. But you're not necessarily putting down roots in that store and building the community in quite the same way, are you?
No, it is a very different thing. It's a very very strange sort of feeling, and it's how do you teach other people to develop that community when you know that you're not going to be there in 2 weeks' time, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and you've got a very short period of time to sort of suss people out and sort of work out, okay, who's going to work, who's not going to work, which can be, again, it can be a tough.
Yeah, I imagine it would be.
But exciting. Like every day is different. But yeah, definitely an exciting sort of thing. But those stores are still open. Some of those folks that I recruited back then still work for the company. So
great.
Which is definitely cool.
Yeah, that's really fun.
Like that.
So where did you go after you'd sort of settled or gone through that process and like rised up the ranks in the retail space?
So after that, I went to I basically moved into the promotion studio. It was what we call it. I think at the time in Australia we just called it the studio, right. But it probably more reflected a promotions kind of approach rather than creating any product or anything like that, which people might more associate with the studio in Nottingham. But we did I think, but basically at the time there was one person in the studio, promotion studio. That was my friend Timmy Steele, and he moved to the UK to work for GW in the UK, and so they needed somebody to take over.
Right.
So it was me. I moved back to Sydney, and worked at head office for 4 years, 4.5 years.
Right.
And at the time, that was all about creating promotional flyers for mail order, promotional flyers for the stores.
Right.
Some stores would have, so all the stores had games night. Usually in Australia, it was a Thursday night. I think in South Australia and Melbourne, Friday night was late night shopping. So
Right.
we had different flyers for those stores, all that sort of thing. We'd do big, enormous posters for mail order. And so it was coordinating what was going to go onto those posters, doing the layout for it, talking with printers, placing print orders, that kind of thing.
Right. Would that
That was sort of the initial start there. Yeah.
Right. And I'm just curious as well, because obviously that's sort of there's obviously local need in terms of the dates and the times and whatever else. And like you say, the different evenings that would be appropriate for events. Was that what was driving that being a sort of local thing rather than there just being a central, here's a load of flyers generated in the Nottingham studio that you can then just add some extra addresses on or whatever?
Yeah, well, at that time, there wasn't the internet was very different to how we approach things now.
Sure.
You and I sitting here, me on my laptop on my desk in my basement. We had to have sort of very chunky connections to get things sort of around the world. Otherwise, it was pop them on a ship. All of our miniatures arrived by a boat from the UK. And so sometimes we were a month behind, 6 weeks behind releases, that kind of thing. Something that I just remembered is when I was working in the stores, the way that we found out what was being released that month was when White Dwarf appeared in our stores.
Right.
So usually White Dwarf would appear on a Tuesday, maybe the first Tuesday of the month, that kind of thing. And it arrived with the first half of the new releases. So we'd open up the magazine, have a look at what was listed in new releases, and then we'd know what was coming 2 weeks later.
Right.
So we had our stuff, and then what was coming 2 weeks later as well. And that was the first time we'd know, oh, it's Realm of Chaos, or oh, it's this, it's the Dark Elves.
Right.
Whatever it might happen to be. So that was it was a very interesting time. There was no, hey, somebody's just leaked this photo of a plastic Thunderhawk. There was none of that going on. So, that local need could only really be serviced by either guys in the store drawing something up and getting it photocopied at their local print shop, or us designing something centrally and sending it. Sorry, I say centrally. So it's designing something in country,
Sure,
to send out to the stores.
Right. Yeah, and so that was you're covering off like events and mail order and that kind of stuff. Was there any other sort of promotional activity that you were covering in that role?
Those were sort of the key things. There would occasionally be times when our trade sales guys, the ones who work with independent retailers, they might have an event that they were, like a big event they were trying to draw a lot of people to.
Right.
So we'd create something for that. They might be looking for rules or an idea or just something crazy, a scenario. And we try and put that together and provide that as well. And then I think the other thing was with our big chunky internet connection where we could send things back and forth between the UK studio, we'd create specific pages that could drop into what was then printed as the Australian version of the White Dwarf.
Right.
So I think the initial magazine at the time, Paul Sawyer was the editor at the time that I was working on it, Paul Sawyer was the editor
Right.
of White Dwarf, and in that there would be specific pages that would advertise grand openings or store openings or other events and road shows and that sort of thing that were specific to the UK.
Hmm.
And we had the opportunity there. It was maybe like 8 pages a month. The opportunity there to replace those with Australian advertising, or a list of Australian and New Zealand stores, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So pure, like the directory sort of stuff, wasn't it? All of
yeah,
that kind of things. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So I'm not sure exactly when that started. I think that might have been in about '96. We
Right.
started doing that,
Because until
replacing.
that point, had White Dwarf been shipped over as well then? So was
Yeah.
there a change to printing White Dwarf in Australia?
Well, at that time, those pages, basically, I'd lay out those pages in Quark Express,
Right.
and lay out those pages in Quark Express, and then send those digitally to the UK. They were printed in basically the rest of the magazine was printed. Then this 8-page section would be replaced with an Australian set bound and then shipped to us via boat.
Right.
So
It was a localized issue, but it was still printed in the UK alongside the UK issues. Right.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So there was that kind of format, and I can't remember the time when, like in the US, team started printing specifically in the US. I know that there's a date around somewhere, but essentially we went through that process of uploading files when we sort of each month. We had that wonderful thing of, okay, we've got 8 pages, which were probably some ungodly size of like maybe 20 megabytes. And when we sent it at the time, it was like, came in the next morning hoping and praying that your 20 megabytes had gone through. Occasionally it hadn't, so you had to send it again. And the tough part with us being on the other side of the planet was that there was that wonderful 12-hour difference.
Right.
It wasn't like, okay, it didn't come through, send it again. There was a whole day in between those two.
Right.
So, yeah, it's mid, or probably towards the end of '98, and we started talking with the studio about printing White Dwarf in Australia. So that was sort of a bit of a process there. I had to go through and find a paper supplier, find a printer that would be able to print magazines and print enough for us. And that was quite interesting. We sort of had to interview a bunch of people and check a bunch of things out. Fortunately, in Sydney, there was we did find a great paper supplier who was able to get us the quality of paper that we wanted, which we felt was very important, obviously. And we found there was a printer there that printed pretty much most of the magazines in Australia.
Right.
So in the end, it was our magazine was a fairly small magazine for them. We were probably printing about 3,000 copies
Right.
at the time, and when we finally settled on them and we'd go and do press checks, I remember doing press checks where, because ours was a smaller run, that'd be done overnight. So I'd have to go get there at like 8 p.m. and then 9 p.m. they'd come and get me and say, hey, how does this signature look? And it's like, yep, that looks great. Sign off. Then I go back and sit in a room for an hour. They'd come and get me, check the next signature, like that for the whole magazine. And then maybe like 4 a.m. I get to go home and get a couple of hours of sleep before heading back into the office. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you remember like what the sort of distribution for the UK or the US magazine would have been around that time?
I don't remember exactly. Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't couldn't say with any.
I'll put you on the spot there, Dave. So
I couldn't say with any hint of
Sure.
certainty. I could guess. I would say that the US was probably around. I guess would be around sort of that 5,000 or 6,000 mark,
Right.
and the UK was probably around maybe 9,000 or 10,000.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So actually, the 3K Australian issues is, like, relatively speaking, is a solid number.
It was fairly significant. We had a very strong focus in our stores, primarily as well. We were leverage that idea of you didn't know what was coming. Like White Dwarf was what told you everything.
Right.
White Dwarf was your rumor engine. It was your Warhammer community site. It was everything. So I know that when I was the store manager, like in the Sydney City store, our best issue was the I mentioned Dark Elves before because it just reminded me. You had the Dark Elf issue 187. It had the cover of the, I guess, fourth edition. Yeah, fourth edition
Right.
Dark Elf rulebook. We called it Play Dwarf because of the scantily clad witch elves on the cover. But we sold over 300 copies of that
Right.
magazine in our store alone.
Wow.
So we're always, all of our store managers were always fairly competitive. So selling the most White Dwarf copies was a pretty important thing for us. So it did lead to a fairly significant print run for us when we started. So I think at that time we probably had 10 or 12 stores in Australia.
Right.
So yeah.
That's it. I mean, I'm not surprised that the Dark Elves would get people buying issues in droves.
Yep.
But
yeah.
that move then to printing in Australia obviously opened the door to, like, new content then for the magazine.
Yeah.
So you could do more, like, local content, and that's when, was that the point at which you took over as you became the editor of Australian White Dwarf?
Yeah,
Right.
that was the point there. Up until that point, I'd been technically on the White Dwarf team. So in the UK printed Australian issue, there would be the UK team. So like Andy Sherman and Paul Sawyer and Nick Davies and guys like that, and myself and Justin Keys, a little bit later Tara Kanko. We were on that page.
Right.
That was one of the pages that we got to sort of slide us in. It was still Paul Sawyer's editorial, but we put us in there because at the same point we were able to change the prices of the products. So
Of course.
put them all in dollary dues. But after that point, it was essentially we sort of split that and said, okay, here's the Australian White Dwarf team, and here are the folks in the UK doing the UK stuff. But yeah, we did have the opportunity to do more local content. We did additional coverage of Games Day. So I think that first issue that we published in Australia was in July '99,
Right.
and was released at Games Day '99, which at that point the promotion studio also organized and coordinated and that kind of thing. So we were very excited to be able to put that out, and I think we got a pretty good response at the event. But yeah, doing coverage of Australian Golden Demon in the magazine was great. The tough thing that we had that slowed a little bit of our progress was that none of us on the team were photographers
Right.
at the time. So we had to essentially like hire freelancers for different events or for different specific shoots that we wanted to do, and there just wasn't there weren't a lot of people around that could photograph miniatures particularly well. So that kind of kept us fairly quiet initially. But then we started to sort of push out a little bit. Some of us made more frequent trips to the UK, and we'd take things over and we get them photographed there, and
Right.
the professional, UK studio shots back, and do things like that. So, there was a lot of great stuff that we were able to do. Matt Weaver, I think, was a part of the team at the time then, like by then.
Right.
And he and I did a number of like painting challenges where we'd race to see who could paint the largest army first and that kind of thing. But yeah, that was a pretty exciting time. The change was very cool. We could also go and talk to store managers, store staff, get content from them. We could find folks in the community who were doing awesome work and feature them as well. So yeah, it was a exciting time.
Yeah, I'll
Definitely.
bet. I mean, I'm curious about like, did you have a quota that you had to use a certain amount of the UK base magazine, or was it just all up for grabs based on how much time you had and how much content you could generate?
I think at the time the plan was that we would be using all of the UK content,
Right,
all of the UK core content,
right,
or all of the I guess the core studio content is
right.
probably
So
the
like
best way to
the
put it.
rules and features and battle reports, that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Right,
and then anything that was UK specific, like UK events or activities or listings or whatever, we could
right,
switch those out. Uh, and then with printing, printing works in either 8-page or 16-page
right,
batches for signatures. Just the way that they print the sheets double-sided and then fold them and cut them.
right,
So we always had to decide, okay, are we going to add 8 pages? Are we going to add 16 pages? There was nothing in between. There was no adding
right.
12 pages.
Sure, sure.
So that would usually be from a like a month to month sort of basis, or we'd plan ahead, we'd plan 2 or 3 months ahead, and then keep that rolling forward
Right,
so that we could keep our content coming through.
right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I mean, and did you sort of continue to, did the magazine sort of circulation grow over that time now that you had that Australian like focus and lens?
It did. I think we were we did grow it. The number of stores opening continued to grow. We opened stores in New Zealand as well. So we had Wellington and Auckland, and additional stores continued from there. We opened stores in like 2 or 3 stores in Perth, more stores in Adelaide and Melbourne. Moved to Queensland and opened stores in Queensland. I wasn't doing that at the time, but just the number of GW stores that we had that were opening was helping fuel that continued growth for the magazine. And I don't I don't know that I could say how much the fact that it was local
Mm.
was fueling any growth. I'd like to think that it was. I'd like to think that people enjoyed our Australian banter in the pages. Uh, but it was definitely a fun time, and I think that people were excited. People were excited by the fact that it was local. It
Mm.
was We were seeing what Australians were doing with sort of Games Workshop miniatures and Warhammer and how they were playing and what was going on with tournaments and other events and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it also helped when there was a sort of towards the end of my time with the studio in Australia, there was a move for larger events in stores connected to strong releases. So things like the Necron release or the Tau release, would there'd be a big event, a big
Mm.
weekend, a scenario, a couple of scenarios. There'd be things sent to the store, like props. Matt Weaver was fantastic he was a fantastic sculptor, and he also loved to dabble with casting and that kind of thing. So there was one time we had an event that had where we sent out drop pods. So this
Right.
is before drop pods had been created by Forge World, but we had these sort of resin cast drop pods that Matt had designed that went out to stores for an event. We had Thrones of Power that were cast in
Sure.
Hydrastone. but doing that and then supporting that with something in White Dwarf was kind of in a way that we sort of approached that as well.
Yeah, that answers a question for me as well, Dave, because I've seen that Throne of Power, or one
Right.
of them, and I was
Yep.
really curious about was that an official miniature? Was that something that was released? But no.
There, there was a time. There was certainly a time. Probably like I usually like to say sort of everything before Lord of the Rings. There was a time when it was very much about enthusiasm and excitement and creativity and an invitation to create. So we could do all of these things that weren't official in air quotes, but the people who look at and go, "Oh, that's cool. That's fun. That's yeah, definitely have fun doing that." Whereas I always feel that post starting on the road with Lord of the Rings, I think because of the way that New Line Cinemas and Tolkien Estates sort of handled the intellectual property, where folks at Games Workshop looked at that and went, oh, that's a very interesting approach. Perhaps we should start thinking about that with our intellectual property. So there became fewer opportunities after that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, actually. I'd never really put those two things together, but I guess maybe there was a move from like the celebrate the hobby in a way, like a do-it-yourself kind of way and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then yeah, if there's the IP nature
Yep.
of Lord of the Rings at that time is coming in. I am imagining you weren't allowed to sort of do it yourself when it came to the Lord of the Rings stuff, right? There's got to be
No,
more official stuff that.
that was much more difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
everything we didn't. I don't think we did any content. Certainly, when I was in Australia, we didn't do any content around Lord of the Rings. When I moved to the US, there was and was working on White Dwarf. We did some things then, but they were very much like we had to do them a few more months in advance, send them off for approval, and all that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
sorry
that's
about that. I don't know
interesting.
if you just
And
heard
then
that.
how that yeah, I'm gonna go away and research some of that, Dave, I think, because actually that's a really interesting perspective on how the company
I don't know whether it's a like complete true thing, but it's something that I've kind of felt over time
Sure.
that was a pivot point. Maybe the effects might not have been seen for a few years after that. Certainly in my time in the US, working on White Dwarf there and working on other projects as well, there was a drive to continue to do local content for Warhammer, for 40K, and for Lord of the Rings.
Right.
But there was certainly a control on the Lord of the Rings stuff that we did.
Sure. Yeah.
You could in 40K you could create a great scenario on a world that never existed before with an orc war boss that had a cool name,
Yeah.
but you could not create a new land in Middle Earth
Sure.
with a new
Yes.
character that didn't exist in the books or the movies.
Sure. Yeah. I was going to ask just before leaving Australia, there's that classic battle report between you and Paul Sawyer when he came to visit you, right?
Right. Yep.
I wondered if you recalled anything about that because that was just a really fun one.
I do. That was it was a fun story, and going back to the first sort of content we created for Australian printed Australian White Dwarf, we had like a 12 pages or 14 pages or something like that we had to fill. It was like, okay, we need something for this, and so we did our first battle report, which was myself and a store manager called Chris Feldman, and it was his Imperial fists against my Praetorians, Praetorian Imperial Guard, and he had one of the very early Space Marine guys who led his army. He was a guy with a sort of, I think, double-handed chainsaw pose and a
Right.
crazy sort of almost Space Wolf-like head.
Right.
And painted him up, and Chris called him Crazy Joe. So we went through, we did a battle report. We had a lot of fun with the battle report, and we called the battle report Crazy Joe Wears Yellow.
Right.
And it went through, we printed it, we sent it out. And when folks in the UK, in the core studio had saw it, like when Paul saw it and a few other people saw it, I got a bit of a dressing down about that.
Right.
And talked about basically how to present our stories and our miniatures and that kind of thing with a little bit more reverence.
Right.
So I think so. I say I got a dressing down. It was Paul. Paul Sawyer called me and sort of talked me through it, and he did a really good job of that. It was. I'm sure had it come from some other people, it might have just been a pure stream of yelling for 30 minutes. But I was like, okay, fantastic. Thank you for this information. When I'm over next, let's sort of talk it through again. And maybe I can sit in and watch a battle report being done and all this sort of thing. Because there's a lot of stuff that we were doing that we'd heard about, we'd read about, we'd never seen ourselves. So like our first games day in Australia, I got to organize that. And it wasn't until after our second games day that I got to go to another games day. So I was like, okay, cool. This is how it could be.
Right.
Ours was still a great event and people enjoyed it. But it was done based on stories I'd been told. And kind of that's how our first battle report was done. And so when Paul came over for, I think, Games Day 2000, as our special guest, he and I went to a store and where we played the battle. We Justin Keys took all the notes and we took snapshots along the way. And then I sent my army back to the UK and they photographed the army based on the snapshots that we'd taken during it. And yeah, then it came back and then I put together the battle report. So it was very much a learning lesson for Dave.
That's great. Yeah, because did you actually fight it just the once and then the events that took place are exactly what was reported on?
Yeah, actually, that was very much that. We fought it in store,
Right.
because we'd paid for Paul to come over all the way to Australia for Games Day, and we wanted to make, again, sort of get as much value out of it.
Right.
So having he and I fight a battle report, something that was going to appear in White Dwarf in a store, drew a great crowd at the store as well. So
that's fun. Yeah, I mean, having actually fighting a battle with a sort of crowd of spectators must have been a fun experience just on its own.
Yeah, it was definitely good. Like there was some fun chanting going on and barracking on the sidelines. I'm sure it's very different from any other battle report that Paul played in, but it was definitely a lot of fun at the time. Yep.
Fantastic.
Actually,
but
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just thinking maybe it might have been faster than that. He might have come over in 99. I think he came over in 99.
Right.
Because we also went and saw The Matrix and The Mummy at the movies when he was over.
Sounds like a pretty good trip that Paul had.
I'm sure he had a fantastic time. Definitely.
Fantastic. And then, you mentioned that you moved to the US and you continued working on White Dwarf there. What was that transition like?
Well, towards the end of, probably towards the middle of 2001, I was really lucky. I got an invitation from both the core studio in the UK and the promotion studio in the US to come and work for them. And it was like, oh, this is super exciting because I love to travel and I love to sort of see different people's perspectives on things, and it would be super exciting to live in the UK or the US. It'd be great. It's on the other side of the planet. So I thought about it and sort of worked through a few different things, and in the end decided on moving to the US to work with the US promotions team. And I came in as special projects manager. Right. So there are a few things they sort of were starting to do that I got to help coordinate. So some of the things like the Warhammer Skirmish project.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if you've. I'm pretty sure you've probably seen the booklet,
Sure.
that kind of thing. As well as that booklet, our scenery team that we had in the promotion studio made sort of 2 foot by 2 foot tables of a bridge and a tower.
Right.
So we had to go through the process of somebody sculpting one up, casting it, so that we had the same thing that went out to. So casting up the tower, casting the bridges. That was Jason Buyaki and his team. And so helping coordinate that, make sure everything was painted, get photography done, the booklet, or everything that could go out for that was, at some point, I sort of touched through that process. We did similar things for Battlefleet Gothic. We did like a push for Battlefleet Gothic again a little bit later.
Right.
We did some things with Lord of the Rings for Games Days. At one point, we built an enormous Mount Doom.
Right.
We'd play the basically the battle that you see at the start of the Fellowship of the Ring.
Right.
From the end of the Second Age.
So like the Battle of the Last Alliance would it have been then?
That's it. Yeah, the Last
Right.
Alliance. Absolutely. And so you'd have people standing on both sides of the table, nice big long lines of troops, and then behind there would be Mount Doom smoking. It had like a fog machine in it, and
Oh,
all
cool.
that sort of stuff. So helping coordinate that project, making sure we had enough miniatures painted and tables made and all that sort of stuff. So that's the sort of thing that I started to do.
Right.
And in the studio at the time, the promotion studio, it was a very in an open and sort of free to create sort of whatever you wanted to create. And then if it happened to line up with what was being put into the magazine at the time, whatever you're doing could slide in.
Right.
Like, if we're the mail order guys might have decided, okay, well, this range of bits, we want to promote this range of bits, and they'd come and dump a whole bunch of bits in the promotion studio office, and people would grab them and make something with them, and that'd end up as an article in the US magazine.
Yeah. Am I right that this was the time when the US like mail order were producing some of their own miniatures and things like that as well, just like limited run like a Bugman's cart, for example, and things of that nature.
I think I don't know exactly if I can speak to that. I don't. I think that might have been a little bit earlier
Right.
than my time. I think by that point there were specific sort of promotional miniatures that were coming from the studio. So prior to that, there might have been some promo minis done.
Sure.
Until to sort of prod and say, hey, promotional miniatures can be fun. We can use them for all these different kinds of things. And probably after that point, they were mostly coming from
Sure.
the studio.
Right.
The UK studio.
And you continue to do some work with White Dwarf as well, though. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the after a little while, so during my first couple of years in the US, everybody was contributing to White Dwarf. Everybody in the studio who could do something or wanted to do something could contribute something, and most of it was like we'd get excited about painting new armies or painting up new releases, that kind of thing. So we'd have things like Bretonnian armies being shown off, or Wood Elf armies, or we had, I think there's a classic sort of Halloween issue that has a bunch of like plague bearers and rotting cows and that kind of thing on the cover,
Right.
with a rotting windmill behind it. But again, in that, it was, here's how to build your own windmill terrain. Here's how to do some horribly defiled cow carcasses.
Sure.
And yeah, there was just it's sort of a lot of opportunity to have fun and do that. Paint up 3 or 4 wood elves in different seasonal color schemes. And
Sure.
that. So I think there was a lot of stuff that was coming through where it was the central studio would doing here's stuff that supports the products that we made, and then things that we were doing were here's how hobbyists are taking those products and doing something slightly different with them.
Hmm.
So we figured that showing people a lot of different ideas just increases the opportunity for somebody to connect with it.
Sure.
Someone to say, hey, that's a great idea, or I hadn't thought of that before, or I like the look of that, but I needed to see it in a different color scheme. So that's kind of what we were doing. We're taking it and then doing something different with it, or putting it giving a different perspective on it.
Yeah.
There's a
Am
lot of
I
things we did
right
there.
in thinking that was there more leeway to sort of add or explore content with the US editions than the Australian edition? Had things changed by that time?
Well, I think it was probably more of a when we were working on it, when I was working on it in Australia, I didn't really know what we could do or
Right.
how far we could push things. I knew that we couldn't push them as far as Crazy Joe Wears Yellow, so I was probably a little bit more cautious.
Right.
Afterwards, some of the folks who ran the promotion studio, like Grant Peacey and Jim Fox in Australia, pushed things a little bit further than I did when I was there.
Right.
And in the US, the team there had a bit of a tradition of pushing things further
Mm.
before I arrived.
Right.
So they were very much like, yeah, we'll just do this. It's our magazine. We're the ones paying for it, kind of thing. So, yeah, there was there felt like quite a bit more leeway for it.
Right. Yeah.
And I know
Yeah.
certainly for me, I didn't have to make the decisions. I wasn't the editor in the US. Somebody else was making those calls.
So you just got to do all the fun stuff.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other things as well is that in the US, because we had all the metal manufacturing was done in the same building that we're in.
Right.
The casting room was there, the room full of bits. It was much easier for us to do something different.
Right.
If I wanted to do something like some of the armies that I made when I was in the US, if I wanted to do that while I was in Australia, it would have been looking through a catalog, noting down all the parts, guessing how many I would need, sending off an order, hoping in 6 weeks later it would arrive, and then I was still excited about doing that project.
Right.
Whereas for in the US, it was like, hey, this would be a cool idea. And you walk over to the bits room, you pick up a bit, you put it next to another bit, and go, oh, it's not quite the right size. Oh well, let's forget that. Or go, oh yeah, it's perfect. So let me buy 30 of those and 40 of those.
Sure.
So it was a very different the different access to things that you could do.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say there. It was whether things became less restrictive or were less restrictive in the US. I think that I felt that they were,
Right.
but that might have just been a sort of a personal thing. It might have been I could have done those if I was in Australia, but
Sure. I
I
get
hadn't
you.
thought to.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I only asked just because the obviously like the General's Compendium, for instance, was
Right.
composed by the US White Dwarf team, wasn't it? And that's
Yeah.
kind of pushing the boundaries of what the content could be and sort of what stuff could be explored. And
Yeah.
similarly, when the Storm of Chaos happened, and there's obviously a lot of US centric kind of exploration of that event, and
Yeah.
specific coverage in those issues of White Dwarf.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think earlier, so something like the Battle for Armageddon, for example, the global campaign, the website for that was the charge for that was led purely by the US promotion studio team, and that needed content.
Hmm.
And well, content they didn't need content, but they wanted content to make it exciting, so people could go back each day, and not only could they put in their reports, but there was something new to look at, something interesting to read, something that got them more immersed in the campaign. So there was always that kind of, what else can we do? What else can we do? How can we add to that? What else can we give people? So yeah, certainly with Storm of Chaos and that we did a lot of terrain building. Again, Jason Buyaki and Jake Landis and Chad Merjois and Rob Hawkins did work on some fantastic sort of siege terrain, huge castle walls. It was a fantastic battle report where massive sort of castle walls that were being attacked, and you couldn't only access over a bridge that was maybe a foot wide across this table. Otherwise, you had to. There were all sorts of things going on.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff on that table, but it just very much from that. We were all very passionate about the stories and the miniatures and what we could do, and there was always how about this or how about that? What's the next thing that we can do? There was very much that pull to move things forward.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, it certainly reads that way as well. You can see that enthusiasm permeating. In fact, all of the versions of White Dwarf, I think, really have that, don't they?
yeah,
But I mean, you mentioned the sort of opening the doors when it came to conversions and the opportunities that you might have had there. I think one of the things that a lot of people would recognize you for is your amazing armies and your projects that you've put together over the years. I guess I was curious about like the process that you would go through for those, and also the speed, because it seems like you must be very quick at like modeling and painting and stuff, right?
sure. Yeah, I kind of am. People have certainly joked about it a lot over the years. There's a friend of mine who says that like he could come and visit me at work, like that I worked with him, Jeff Smith. He'd come over to my desk and we'd chat about something, and he'd throw me an idea. And his joke was always that by the time he walked back to his desk, I will have completed the army. That never actually happened. But no, there were just again, like when we're in that, I guess that environment of what else, what's something different, what's something new that we could do. There are things where it was like we had the Bretonians release, I think in 2003.
Right.
And there was a lot of cool stuff being done with them. The knights being painted up in their wonderful colors. I think our photographer, Dirty Steve, he painted up some Bretonians in with heraldry from A Song of Ice and Fire. So connecting that to a book series that he was reading that at the time nobody ever thought was going to be a TV show,
Sure.
or it'd be as huge as it is now. At the time, there were a lot of us in the studio going, "What's this series again?" I don't know. Sounds a bit weird. But there was always that sort of drive to do something different. So I converted up some Bretonians to look a bit, or be reminiscent of sort of World War One British in trenches, and they became the Jenswick 33rd Rifles army that I did, which is probably one of the armies that most people know that when they see it, they go, "Oh yeah, I recognize that." But that was all about taking plastic Cadian arms that had just come out sort of fairly recently, the plastic Cadians, and sticking them onto Bretonian men-at-arms and painting them in a very drab green. So there was the opportunity to I said it was the opportunity to buy two armies to make one, but one that had sort of quite a bit of impact, more impact than just a Bretonian or just a Cadian army would have had. This army,
Sure.
sort of really connected something visceral with people. So,
Well, it's quite inspirational stuff, I think, isn't it? Because it exemplifies one of the great aspects of the hobby is that you can absolutely let your imagination go wild. You can see all of this amazing stuff that's out there, all of these kits and models,
yeah,
but that's not the limit of it. You can then do other things. You can create a third thing with these two elements, and I think you showcase that a lot in your work.
yeah, it's something that I do like to do. I always sort of harken back to that the feeling of that invitation to create. It's part of the. I know that other folks have discussed it on in your interviews, but the idea that there are 1,000 Space Marine chapters. Here are colors schemes for 25 of them. 25. That means that there's like 975 others that I can create whatever I want. That was always the idea. It was always the invitation. And the number of Space Marine painting new chapter Space Marine painting competitions that have been held over the years has got to be ridiculous. There, no doubt, there's tens of thousands of Space Marine chapters that have been created, even if only painted in one miniature. But it was taking that idea or that feeling and putting it through other stuff. So there were some. I did a Adeptus Mechanicus army, and there were no rules for Adeptus Mechanicus at the time. So I just created a bunch of models that I liked the idea of, really, and was able to cram them into the Lost and the Damned list.
Right.
It was part of the which one was that? Was that the Eye of Terror campaign?
Right.
I think it might have been
Possibly. I wouldn't want to guess because I'm not. I don't know that I'm close enough to the to confirm it. But I do remember the Lost and the Damned at the time.
Yeah. So as a format, it was just proxying. So it might have been this unit of heavy servitors made out of ogres with mega armor claws would be the big mutants. That unit.
Sure.
This unit of taking the Bretonian Grail reliquary Grail pilgrims, and replacing their arms with las guns. They would now become the small mutants or some other unit type in there. Something that made sense and was consistent across the army. But again, that idea is just to say, if you've got a cool idea, give it a go. Try something. I did a Custodes army back in the day as well, using rules-wise. I sort of built it as a Grey Knights army. So a match with the Demon Hunters codex that was released around the time.
Right.
And that was inspired by a lot of great concept sketches from like leading up to 4th edition 40k concept sketches from Jez Goodwin, where all the Space Marines just had loads and loads of purity seals and icons and fetishes, and they were dripping in it. So I was like, okay, well, let's take that and some of the artwork from the cool Sabretooth Games Horus Heresy card game and mash them together and do it with this kind of army, and then people can play with it. But it's helping people break that idea of it has to be as it comes out of the box, and it has to conform to what's in that list, where the name of this thing is the name of that thing.
Sure.
I've always sort of felt that it doesn't have to be that. That's a great place to start.
Yeah.
They can move on from there.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned Lost in the Damned, the original version, the way back in Rogue Trader and third editions of those Realm of Chaos books. They're all about that. There's no official version of anything, more or less, because it's all totally random, and you're encouraged to kind of glue random bits together and create these weird and wonderful monsters.
What was the D1000 mutation chart or something?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, which is fantastic fun just on the face of it, but then what that leads to when it comes to the hobbying aspect is really fun as well.
Yeah.
Are there any like secrets that you would share just when it comes to like putting together armies and doing it quickly? Is there, or is it really just things take as long as they take?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I have any secrets at all. I don't. Again, I'm not a sort of fan of that idea. If I do something that is going to help somebody, I'll definitely let them know. Practice is the big one. Practice is the thing that speeds up building muscle memory. Because a lot of the time when we're painting miniatures, the thing that can take the longest is, okay, how many brush strokes am I putting on this leg, for example? Before the show, before the interview, I mentioned Tommy Sewell. I recently a couple of years ago, I worked with Tommy on a book, and before that, he said, "Okay, Dave, I want you to go through the first couple of lessons of my sort of fundamentals of painting, And one of the first things we did was pick up a Space Marine. He said, "Okay, paint that leg blue." So I painted the leg blue, and and he said, "Oh, how many brushstrokes do you think it took you for that?" And I said, "I don't know, 12." And he goes, 20, 24. I was
Right.
like, "Oh, okay." So a lot of what he teaches is being mindful about where you're putting your brushstrokes, so you don't have to do as many.
Mm.
And the fewer you do, the faster you're going to paint
Right.
the miniature. The fewer, longer, smoother brushstrokes that you do, the faster you're going to paint your miniatures. When I was in Australia for Games Day 2000, I painted up all the miniatures and built a board for a Gaunt's Ghosts game. So I had Gaunt's Ghosts and the Jantine Patricians and the Vitrian Dragoons on one side, and the Shriven Chaos Forces on the other side. And for those Chaos Forces, I used the Steel Legion models, which at the time that when I was painting them, they hadn't been released yet.
Right.
Gordon Davidson, who I think was head of the studio at the time, sent me a whole bunch, sent me like 300 models. And I painted those up to be the opposing force. So it was basically going to be a big mega battle at Games Day. And I don't know how long it took me to paint a miniature, one of those miniatures at the start of the process, but I
Mm.
know that by the end, it was under 5 minutes
Wow.
per model. Because I painted the last 30 models in like just over 2 hours, like it's like 2.5 hours.
Right.
Because by that point, I knew exactly where every brushstroke had to go. There was nothing missing. So it was kind of mechanical.
Mm.
Some people look at that and say, "Wow, it sounds terrible. That's not at all artistic." It's like, that's probably true. But
Right.
that got me to 300 painted miniatures.
Sure. Yeah.
If I was to go back and paint one now, would it take me 5 minutes? No, it would probably take me an hour. But because I painted 300 before that, those last ones were,
Mm.
and you know where to do it, where to cut corners, that kind of thing. But I always say that one of the other things that I say quite a bit to people when we're talking about painting is make your painting a habit, not a chore.
Mm.
A lot of folks who feel that they struggle to paint armies are like, okay, sit down and okay, I'll sit down and do some painting tonight. Do all the setup and get it all done, and then start the painting and go, oh, this isn't really working how I hoped it was. This feels like a bit of a chore. I'm going to put it aside and escape from my chores for the day.
Mm.
But for me, sitting down and painting is a habit. I do it as often as I can. And sometimes it might be I've got 20 minutes to paint, which means I can get like boots painted black on 10 infantry.
Mm.
And then the next time I sit down to paint something exciting, if I've got a couple of hours to paint something exciting, I don't have to paint those boots because they're already done. So if it's a habitual painting, so you paint 3, 4, 5 times a week or whatever it happens to be, for however long it is, you can get all of the boring stuff done. And when you're feeling creative and exciting, or you interested, like excited to get started on something, that's when you can experiment
Mm.
with color schemes or painting styles or techniques or a new brush or whatever it happens to be. But otherwise, there's all the mechanical stuff as well that you can get done. That it's not the exciting part that nobody's going to look at.
Sure.
Sorry, not the not exciting part, the boring part that nobody's going to look at.
Sure. But essential nonetheless. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you don't paint
Nice.
the edge on that base, the rim on the base, if you don't paint that,
Yeah.
people will notice. But
Yes.
it's not winning you any golden demons that paint's sure.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I don't think there's any danger of anything I've painted winning a golden demon, but I know the satisfaction of when you do get to do the rim and the base and that's finished and it
yeah.
feels very nice. It's a great moment.
Yeah, I got to throw a shout out to my friend Ty Finocchiaro, who I used to work with at Games Workshop in the US, who I think coined the phrase the victory lap. That's what that is. Do that thing last because you know that you've finished your model. That's the victory lap.
That's great. Yeah.
So, yeah,
But But
hopefully that's sort of answered the question. There are no secrets.
yeah, absolutely, David. It has indeed, yeah. And
Working out
actually,
what works for
you
you.
also brought up Tommy Sewell there when you were just talking about the book that you guys have written on, because you've moved into a publishing space now, right? So you do
Yeah.
the art of books. Could you maybe tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about those?
Sure. I'll throw back to 2008
Mm,
when I left Games Workshop. I went and worked for War Games Illustrated, so another tabletop wargaming magazine,
mm,
published in the UK. I was the US correspondent slash editor for 5 years, and during that time, I learned how to take photos.
mm.
So I got to take photos at events. I got to take photos for articles, all sorts of things. But yeah, I learned to take photos of miniatures, reasonable photos of miniatures. I like to think that I'm not a specialist in anything, but I'm a like 85-90% jack of all trades. But certainly working on War Games Illustrated helped me out with that.
Mm.
And then in 2014, I started Dave Taylor Miniatures. My plan there is to consult with miniature companies, be able to provide my set of skills to them for various projects. As we know, there are a lot of small miniature companies that are 1, 2, 3 people. And quite often there are gaps in those skill sets. Some of it is taking miniatures of photos, some of it's painting the miniatures, some of it's writing ad copy for the miniatures, or doing layout for a book, or contacting a printer. All sorts of different things that I knew how to do based on my 14 years at Games Workshop and 5 years with War Games Illustrated. Started that business and have worked for a lot of fantastic companies over that time. One of them, I was working on laying out a rule book for Disposable Heroes, and which is a World War II game. I'd taken the photos, I was editing the text, I designed what the layout was going to look like, and I was doing the layout. And as all those things were coming together, I was like, I'm really excited by this. I have genuine passion about this project. I'm feeling, as everything's being moved around on the page, I'm feeling a great sort of Zen moment. And I was like, maybe I should do more of this. And then it was like, but I can't write rules to save my life. Right. I'm terrible. I'm a terrible rules writer. So I couldn't write rule books. And then it was the old, they say, like, write what you know.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, well, I'll experiment then. I'll write this book. I wrote a book called Armies and Legions and Hordes, which is, I've been told it's like a project management book for toy soldiers. Where I basically went through and said, okay, here are all the stages along the way of planning an army or planning a large project. And here are a whole bunch of common roadblocks that can pop up. Things that either I've experienced or that my friends have experienced, or any of the thousands of people that I've spoken to about painting armies over the years have experienced. And it's like, and here are ways to overcome them, so that you can work your way through a big project. And then I presented, I don't know, a dozen or more armies and projects and that sort of thing that I'd worked on, with each one saying, okay, during this project, here was the problem I came up against. Here was the struggle that I faced, and here's how I overcame that struggle. So they were the examples in that project management sort of approach. And again, I really enjoyed doing that. It was fun. It was, and then using my contacts that I'd made working in War Games Illustrated, I worked with a printer in Lithuania, and got the book printed, and I ran a Kickstarter for it, all that sort of thing. Found the wonderful pitfalls that you can come across while doing crowdfunding, which included halfway through, somebody said, "Oh, why don't you do a slipcase?" And I was like, "Oh, a slipcase sounds great. How expensive could slipcases be? Not that expensive, surely." And it turned out that the slipcase cost twice as much as the book. because the way that they're assembled. So that caused me. It meant that I didn't really make anything on that first Kickstarter, but it's like, oh, check, that's another learning thing. I always say that, like, I know that I make mistakes, but I aim to learn from those mistakes and make completely different mistakes the next time. So that's my always my thing. But yeah, then I got to work with my friend Mel Bowes, the terrain tutor, who has a very successful YouTube channel and been doing terrain building for 40 years. And Mel and I had been talking from sort of back in the day when we both had a blog, and we'd comment on each other's blogs and that kind of thing. And I'd watch his videos, and but yeah, we decided to work on a terrain book. So we created Terrain Essentials, which was another great learning experience for me in publishing and working with an author that wasn't me, working with somebody. So the first project I did, I had control of everything. So if anything went wrong, I could just blame myself. Working with somebody outside of that meant that there's a whole different dynamic as to how a project has to go. Then the pandemic hit, and things slowed down quite a bit on that. Mel had some very serious health problems that we had to work through. There was a moment where we were going through, and I was getting some basically getting some bullet points from him that I then went into sort of flesh out text-wise, where he was lying on his couch with his like tablet held up above him because he couldn't sit up because he had an air bubble in his lung.
Oh gosh!
And if it moved to a certain point, it was going to be super painful for him.
Right.
So he was there doing that, and I would say, "How about this? How about that? How about the other thing?" And so we do conversations like that, like once a day for 20 minutes, and so again, fun things to learn, learn different ways to push things forward, keep moving forward. And again, very happy that it wasn't a case of us sending packets of information back like 20 megabytes at a time, like we did back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I moved on to the Art of series, where each year I work with 3 different artists, miniature artists whose work I admire and respect, and work with them to create a book that they write. It's about them. It's about their process. It's about their enthusiasm, their passion. And so while each of the books might look similar from the cover, because each cover has the same format, volumes 1 through to 12, each of the artists really approaches things differently. So they're all very different books. And I'm really excited to sort of keep working on that. My aim is to end up with just a huge library, much like like Osprey library, where if somebody goes, I'm really interested in learning about object source lighting. Okay, well, you want to check out the like volume 22 from Victoria Lamb and volume 33 from El Miniaturista, or I'm interested in learning about X. So there'd be a library that people can pick up the books that interest them, maybe get all of them. That'd be cool. But certainly enjoy sort of working through as they find those artists.
Yeah.
So as new people come into the miniature scene in 20, 30, 40 years' time, they go, who's this guy, Roman Lepat? Let me check out his work. Oh, wow. He's doing some really amazing stuff. So yeah, it's been great to work with those folks, and I have a long list of people that I like to work with in the future.
Sure, I'll bet. Yeah. Yeah, because you mentioned you do 3 in a year. You've lined up who the 3 for this coming year are going to be? Yeah,
so in April, we'll go to Kickstarter again. That's another thing that didn't exist back in the day. There was it wasn't a crowdfunding source, and things that like Kickstarter and social media and pledge managers like Backer Kit can provide, is a way to do this, which is amazing. But yeah, my 3 artists for this coming group for volumes 13, 14, and 15 are Vincent Venturella, Tim Marsh, and Natalia Orich. So, yeah, I like to sort of work with people from around the world all at the same time. So, and it's really rewarding to get to sort of sit down and talk with those folks. And most of them have never written a book before. Oh. I have my experience of writing a book, so I can pass that on to them. But I can also sort of talk to them about, they can be like, oh, I'm not sure what to put in this section, or how to talk a little bit more about this. And I'm like, oh, well, how do you approach it? And they'll tell me how they approach it. And I'll go, that is a fantastic idea. I've never heard anybody approach it that way. Let's focus on X. There's a section in the first volume with Elizabeth Beckley, who has what she calls a work in progress shelf. And I mean, we all have shelves that we have work in progress miniatures on, but yeah, she has this shelf that she has miniatures on that she never intends to finish.
Right.
They're up there, they're primed, they're ready to go. She really enjoys painting faces. So if she's had a rough day painting miniatures for somebody, or something that isn't working out the kind of the right way, she'll just sit down and paint a face. She'll grab a miniature, she'll paint a face, and then put it away. It's not for anything. It's just that process calms her down and like gets her recentered. She might be like, okay, on this other miniature, I want to paint fishnet stockings. So she'll pick up a mini that could be appropriate, and she'll practice different ways of painting fishnet stockings on it. And then it goes back on the shelf. Without, when you remove the pressure of ever having to finish the model, you can just use it for all sorts of different things.
Sure.
Vince has got an ogre mini that he uses in a lot of his videos whenever he's talking about painting skin. He has this ogre that, so he paints it, paints the skin on it, and then the next time he has a skin painting video, he primes over it, and he paints it again, and then he primes over it, paints it again. It's the same ogre. So that's something that's specific to Vince. So all of these different things that we can all take either inspiration, or we can take a technique or an idea, is really exciting. And so, yeah, I love the idea of being able to help people find that information.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating, yeah, because obviously you're such a broad range of very highly skilled painters, but from all different sort of aspects of the hobby, I suppose, and sort of approaching things and working on miniatures in different ways. Getting to get a bit of insight into how they are tackling, or how they live the actual work, I suppose, right? Because we all approach the hobby differently, so that seeing into someone else's and seeing how they get to be so good is really interesting.
Yeah, it is great. Like not all of them are professional painters, or that painting is not the day job of all of them. Like Chris Surrey is a pediatrician. Christoph Kyle is a blacksmith.
Right.
Essentially, he works in an artist foundry.
Right.
So he's there's the head artist, and he works on pieces that the artist directs, but he's like swinging hammers at enormous pieces of steel all day, and then he goes home and works on little minis.
Amazing.
But there's a incredible. There is that background. Everybody's got a different background, and different approach, which is amazing. Bjarne Dali, for example, who loves creating fantastic stuff in a grimdark style from Necromunda, and he's working on a lot of great Trench Crusade stuff at the moment. He's an electrical engineer who teaches at a university.
Right.
So there is just that fun of finding what everybody does and how they relax, or what drives them, or what they want to do next.
That's even more interesting, actually, as well, because you are getting different perspective, like lived experiences, and the perspectives that generates onto the same hobby, and then just seeing how different people approach it, what they get from it, and what they bring to it. That's really interesting. Yeah. So there's April is when the next sort of wave are going to hit Kickstarter. You think?
Yeah. Yep. We'll have those in April.
Amazing. Yep. Oh, that's awesome.
Super excited about that. Hopefully later in the year, I'll have Armies and Legions and Hordes Volume 2.
Oh, excellent.
So I've got a nice, new, unique angle on that, which will be good. I've just finished. We just finished the Kickstarter a little while ago for 28 Collected. So the folks who do 28 Magazine,
sure.
It's a fantastic online magazine. We collaborated to create a printed version, a printed collection of their articles. So it's like 320 pages. Right. Earlier today, I think I sent off the final files. So
amazing. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So really, as you can tell, and I'm super excited about it all, and I could talk passionately about it for ages. Well, it's a thing that I love. It's that putting that, arranging everything on screen and knowing that will then be a printed page that somebody can flip through while they're sitting on their couch at the painting table, wherever it happens to be. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I think that passion, like I said earlier about White Dwarf, I think with the books and with a lot of your work, it shows through across the board. That that love for the hobby and for what we all enjoy doing, absolutely comes across, and you see that passion, whether that is in the art of books or elsewhere, and it's just great. And thank you so much, Dave, for sharing that passion today and talking about your history. It's been really wonderful to chat.
No, cool. Thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I said before we started talking that I think that what you're doing is incredibly valuable for the community. It's taking our oral tradition, our storytelling that we all love to do, either about the games or about bad days at work or good days at work, or what happened in the formation of Games Workshop. Which is the monolith that we all are still very attached to in some way, shape, or form. This is a great service that you're doing to the community.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, it's definitely it's awesome.
Thanks, Dave. Well, yes, thank you so much. It's been great.
Cool. Thank you.
Huge thanks to Dave for joining me for such a brilliant chat. It was great fun to talk, and I really enjoyed it. If you would like to find out more about Dave Taylor Miniatures and the Art of book series, you can do so by following the link in the description below. If you would like to support my work researching and documenting the history of Games Workshop and tabletop games, you might wish to consider checking out my Patreon, patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery. You'll get early and exclusive access to articles and research and content. It is hugely helpful. If you are able, I really, really appreciate it, but it's okay if you can't. If you would be able to like and comment on this video and share it with friends and people who you think might be interested, that is enormously helpful as well. Anything you can do to spread news of Jordan Sorcery is a huge benefit to the channel, so I really, really appreciate it. Thank you once again to Dave for joining me. Thank you for being here. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.